Okay, now that we've all got that as the message request of us, let's jump in. Welcome to our roadmap call to navigating Senate Bill 7, something that I suspect many of you have been dealing with since the session ended more than a month ago. What does it do? What does it mean? What was it in intent? And at the bottom line, how does it impact what we do as leaders every single day? And how does it impact the organizations, the school districts, the associations that we lead and serve today? So in our quick 30 minutes, we're going to hear from three of our most trusted and respected leaders in education today. And I am going to just do a quick introduction of each one of them and ask you to very quickly unmute and say hello to everyone, and just a real quick overview of what you're going to share with everyone. So we're going to use that old speech method of tell us what you're going to tell us. And then we're going to ask you to tell us, and then we'll recap at the very end, just so that we're all clear about what we know about Senate Bill 7. And so I'm going to start with our longtime former executive director and our longtime general counsel, Mr. Wayne Young. And so Wayne, if you would put the spotlight on yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Good to have you on board. I won't take up a lot of time. Just my role here. I think I'm going to try to sort out some of the confusion, because there's plenty of it, and it's, there are a lot of hands in this pie. So we'll try to break that down as far as what that means for everybody based on their role.
Thank you, Wayne. And next on the list, joining us today, and a big shout out to Mr. Eric Kennedy, who is the Director of Advocacy at our school boards, our partner in public education. And Eric brings so much value to this conversation today as an expert in governmental affairs, but also as legal counsel as well, and just everyday experience. And so, Eric, if you would say hello to us as well.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me and KSBA to be on this discussion for a very brief, focused piece of this big issue. I think near the end of the call, I will talk about how this issue shows up in school board policies at the district level, and how those policies are about to be changing in the very, very near future, and explain how some of that works.
Thank you and welcome. And next on the list is Mr. Ed Massey, and I'm not sure he needs an introduction, but I suspect many of you may know Ed, have crossed paths with him. There's a multiple number of ways that you could actually have met him. One, most recently, as our representative, Representative Ed Massey, representing an area of Boone County on our General Assembly. He's also served as a president of KSBA and also the National School Boards Association. And he's been a longtime partner and friend to Kentucky school administrators. And so, Ed, if you would say hello to everyone as well.
Hello, everyone. This is Ed Massey, and I'm happy to be here today. You've heard from 3 attorneys now, and you'll probably get 6 opinions. And all kidding aside, I've worked with Wayne Young and Eric Kennedy for a number of years. Both of them are wonderful colleagues, and we have all discussed this bill. And I think Wayne spoke very diplomatically when he called it a confusing piece of legislation. We're going to try to give you some insight to this that will make it easier for you to manage in your district.
Thank you, Ed. And I'm also remiss in not introducing myself. I see many names on the call of folks that I may not have had the opportunity to meet. So I'm the executive director of KASA, and I'm so happy to be here with you today and share this learning space about Senate Bill 7. And so with that, a couple of quick reminders. One, for any questions that you have, please use the chat, and we will possibly address those as we go, should there be time. And if there isn't time, we will get those at the end of the meeting. I am asking Eric and Wayne to add their information to the chat of where they can be contacted with follow-up questions later. And Ed, we will share those with you as well. But since you're in a clerk's office, we won't ask you to monitor or maintain those today. Okay, so with that, let's jump in. And Ed, you are up first, talking to us about an overview of the bill, its intent, its legal standing. What is it that we need to know in getting diving down into this bill?
Thank you, Rhonda. First and foremost, this bill is a bill that, it's no secret, was directed at unions and persons or defendants like KEA. The idea was that they've been taking their dues, or their dues were being paid through these automatic withdrawals from an employer's. The employer would draw these off of the employees' checks, and that's how they were sustaining their membership. The argument or the theory behind it is that the dues collected by KEA were being used for political reasons, like supporting members' campaigns, etc. And so the legislature, in their wisdom, was trying to shut that down. The problem when you throw a cast net like that is you can sweep up other entities in that, depending on how the language is written. And I think it's the consensus of the council that there was some very loosely used words that could put associations like KASA, KSBA, and KASA at risk. Now, what I want to tell you is what has happened since the filing of the litigation. So when the law came to being, it had an emergency provision, which means as soon as the governor vetoed it, and then it was subsequently overrode, then it became effective immediately. So that is a big issue in this case, because it's one of the questions that was asked in the hearings by Judge Shepard. What was the real emergency in this case? And so that's an issue that's hanging out there in the wind right now. Following the passage of this bill and it becoming law, immediately thereafter, the Kentucky Education Association filed suit in the Franklin County Circuit Court. It was assigned to Judge Philip Shepard, and then the motions began to come as well. And the motion initially was an injunction on these proceedings to stop the collection of these or stop enforcement with regards to collection of these dues out of paychecks. So KEA filed a motion to stop enforcement of Senate Bill 7. I went to that hearing along with some other folks, and I think Eric was there, Mr. Rowland was there, and we heard their arguments. Now, the good news is there was no mention of associations in this discussion, in this legal discussion. One of the things that was very difficult for the Attorney General's office to respond to was Judge Shepard's question as to why or what was the real emergency in this situation. There are several things to look at in this bill. One is a constitutional argument that it impairs contracts that were previously entered into before the passage of this legislation between KEA and its members. So that's one argument. Another argument being made is based on the emergence piece and based on the inconclusiveness as who was involved in this. Then I'm trying to get my picture up. She said you can't see me, and I'm not sure why, but the video is on, so I'm not really sure why you can't see me. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I do not know. But I will continue with my discussion if that's okay with Dr. Caldwell. And that is that there is the constitutional argument, but there is also arguments made in the loosely constructed language as to whether this applies beyond any labor association like KEA. Now, some districts have, I think, taken a position or a posture of trying to be safe, and that is they're just stopping these dues deductions from paychecks altogether. And I don't think A, that's appropriate at this time. And B, there has an agreed order has been filed that involves the Kentucky Department of Education that essentially says that there will be no action taken on enforcement of Senate Bill 7 until this matter has been fully briefed and the court has issued an opinion. So no one needs to be living in this immediate fear that they're going to get these sizable penalties that have been referenced in the bill itself. That is on hold. It has been enjoined, if you will, for the time being. And now what's going to happen is the parties, through their lawyers, are going to litigate the issue through briefing and through oral argument as to the constitutionality and to the viability of Senate Bill 7. So there is a placeholder right now that prohibits and basically enjoins that enforcement. Now, that being said, I don't know how long it's going to take them to brief this matter and how long it will take the court to rule on this matter. It's very possible, if not probable, that that will carry up to the next legislative session. If that's the case, then depending on the outcome, I'm certain that the legislature will bring the bill again, but there could be opportunities to change the language and specifically exclude associations that are not political, like KASA, KSBA, and KASS, because you've always taken the position in these associations that we're basically nonpartisan. We stand up for public education, and we try to give people all kinds of neutral views with respect to that. And you haven't been, at least as an association, supporting any independent campaigns. So that is a distinguishing factor as it relates to the three associations specifically mentioned. And there are other entities out there that are also concerned about the enforcement of Senate Bill 7. So if Senate Bill 7 is tossed or is found to be unconstitutional or is stopped, I'm very confident that it will be brought again by the sponsor, but then there will be opportunities to address this over the session, as opposed to how this bill was passed, which was in the waning hours, which a lot of legislation happens that way. And people didn't get the opportunity to read it in detail and to make effective impacts on the pieces of legislation that were filed at the 11th hour. So we are working with, Wayne and I are working together with Bob Rowland and Dr. Caldwell and Eric Kennedy to address these situations. I did want to put the superintendents, though, at ease that they're don't have to worry about this big hammer coming down and striking them on enforcement of penalties if they continue to take out the deductions for these dues. In fact, I know that some districts, and I've talked to some superintendents specifically, have said, we're going to continue to take out the dues until we hear otherwise. Some have stopped, and of course that can have an impact on the functionality and the advocacy of KASA, which is why we're trying to really get out a clear message that for now, there's the agreement that keeps enforcement from occurring. And then also Eric's going to speak to the policies that KSBA feels like they have to generate on behalf of boards. And we've discussed it and we understand it. But I think at this juncture, it's going to be the choice of the district on how they wish to proceed. And so that's kind of where we are in the process at this time. The good news is we have not yet filed our own litigation. That could be forthcoming. There are arguments that could be made on behalf of KASA that are separate and apart from those made by KEA. And so one of the things that we've discussed is we don't necessarily want to be just tied or married to KEA, because there are things we can agree on, but there's many things we disagree on. And so we could have our own independent action if necessary, and we could also seek our own injunction. I don't think that this is going to be resolved in all likelihood before the next legislative session. It is possible, but we will continue to work through this scenario. So that's a quick overview. Again, I'm sorry if my camera is not showing me. You may be grateful, but I will answer any questions or address anything that is brought to my attention. And it says that, does this help? Does that help at all?
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Ed. Yes, you're a handsome
All right.
guy there. We appreciate you
Well,
this morning.
I wasn't trying to, I was trying to monitor because I was having stuff sent over about the Senate bill that also was pertinent, and I wasn't trying to block the camera. That's kind of new to me. So
Okay.
I will be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ed. So if you have questions, be sure and put those in the chat. We'll be circling back to those a little bit later. So at this time, I'm going to ask Wayne, who may jump in here at this point, but also again, possibly at the end, when we look through the lens of how is the KASA leader impacted by the bill, and how are associations like KASA and others impacted. So Wayne, thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks, Ed. There's so much that can be said on the background, and the background is really not important. This is not a unique thing to Kentucky. Florida just passed a similar bill. This is a bill aimed at public employee unions, and it's a national movement sponsored by a group that's actually the parent group of folks like the Bluegrass Institute for Public Policy and others. They're the ones behind this. They want to quit subsidizing, in their words, public employee unions. Well, we're not a public employee union. It's clear we're not. We fought public employee unionism and have a history of that for over 40 years. So, but we got thrown into the bucket at the end with some hideously poor drafting. Eric, former LRC staffer, he knows how to draft a bill, but unfortunately we've lost a lot of institutional memory over there, and people that have a hands-on practical sense of how bills work if you write this in a bill. And right at the end of the session, as Ed mentioned, there was a really carelessly confusing amendment added that I think it's the law of unintended consequences, but it's still there. So what do we do now? And let me throw another group into the pot here, and that's board attorneys. I'll use the old line, some of my best friends are board attorneys, and that's true. But if you look in a school board attorney's job description, hand-wringing is near the top of the list. Being nervous is near the top of the list. That's their job. Their job is to protect boards and school districts and school administrators and superintendents from legal problems. So they tend to be very, very cautious in their advice. So early on in this, when we as an organization felt like we weren't subject to its provisions in this bill, even though it was badly drafted and there were more than one possible reading of its language, we felt pretty confident, and still do, that the bill is not intended to restrict the collection of KASA dues in specifically, and it never was intended to do that. We even have legislators, even a sponsor, saying that. But yet board attorneys, and again, this is not a finger pointing, this is their job, saying to their clients, look, you need to be careful. There's a big penalty clause in here, and you could get slammed if you keep doing this. So I understand why districts would want to protect themselves. Well, good news. One, that's gone. That penalty is gone. The Department of Labor has said we're not going to penalize anybody while this litigation is pending. So in other words, you could go back to collecting these dues without any fear of penalty. And we really need to get that message to your board attorneys. And if they don't know it, share that with them. Superintendents or other staff that routinely talk to them, share with them there is no penalty. Now, you can even, and Eric or Ed may disagree, but my reading of the court order is you can even collect KEA dues without fear of penalty at this point.
I would concur with that, Wayne.
Because the Department of Labor says we're not going to penalize anybody unless and until the constitutionality of the legislation is ruled upon by Judge Shepard. A lot of other legal wrangling going on. There's some interesting pieces to this. Some public employee unions were exempt from this, and that was an interesting little twist. There's some politics behind that, and I think that's one of the flaws in the bill. So I think Ed is exactly right. Regardless of the outcome of the injunction or the litigation, I think the legislature will come back and we'll be able to fix it. But I'll just conclude my remarks saying to KASA members, there is no risk right now in collecting and remitting dues for KASA members. There is none. That's gone. And you can do that without fear of penalty, financial or other legal. You won't be dragged before the court for contempt or anything like that. Now, where that will go in the future, we still don't know. but we're comfortable that you can still collect those dues. Now that'll lead us to the policy piece, which Eric's going to talk about right now. And I've looked at some of these policies. Of course, what we're dealing with now, or were until this bill was passed, was law that said you must collect dues for certain groups. Well, that language is gone, saying you must do it. So now it's you can or you don't have to. And so we would certainly urge people to continue doing it. But I'll let Eric get into the policy piece, or I guess maybe I'm looking at the agenda. Maybe it's back to me and Ed. What happens next? Maybe we've talked about that.
Actually, so it is time for us to hear from Eric. And so Eric is going to speak to us through the lens of what does school board policy look like? And before he jumps in, I do want to just remind everyone, we're looking for questions in the chat. There are a couple there already. And once Eric is able to shed more light on this for us, then we'll swing over to those questions before we hang up. So Eric, thank you again.
Thank you. I know we speak quick, and I know everyone is busy in district, so time is precious and you have a lot going on. I'll try to be brief and focus on the school board policy piece of this. So not to go back over anything that Ed and Wayne have gone over already. Part of what was in Senate Bill 7 is a state statute that has been on the books for just decades at this point, and it is KRS 161.158. That state law requires every local school board to adopt a local board policy to explain how they will manage salary deductions for various things. And so every school board is required to have a policy about salary deductions. And now I'm going to add to the chat something that I'll also reference. Those are some of those key local school board policy numbers to look at. And so those are three main policy areas where this shows up. And everyone on this call, you always need to check your own local school board policies, because some policies are the same in every district. Some are different in almost every district. And these policies are some of the ones that we at KSBA see some of the most local customized versions of, because over the decades, many school boards and payroll clerks and finance officers have done salary deductions in different ways. Some boards have deducted for some groups and not others. Some have a policy that just says any employee that asks for any group to have dues deducted will do that. Many districts have instead tried to put a limit because there is some work involved. So a lot of school boards for years have had a limit that says, well, a certain number of school employees has to ask for us to deduct for a dues for some group before we will. And the percentage number of how many employees have to ask might be different. So you always need to check your school board policies. Those are 03.121 on salaries. Part of that policy probably references these other two, which is 03.1211. That is how you do salary deductions for certified employees, and 03.2211, which is for classified. And so wrapping up pretty quickly, by law, every local school board has to update all of its local policies at least once a year. The deadline for that is in August, and there's kind of a typical timeline set up for this. Every school board in Kentucky by choice has opted into the KSBA policy service. And one of the things that services provides, in addition to just consistent formatting and a numbering system and indexing, is that we push out at least once a year after the legislative session ends, a policy update package. The purpose and the intent of that is that we go through the policies after the session ends in Frankfurt, and a handful of us says, well, what are the absolutely required changes to all of these school board local policies because of a bill that passed? And so we'll update those. The goal is that we are not telling you what to do. Our whole focus is local decision making. We do not go above and beyond with like best practices that we think are a good idea. The goal is that what we push out is sort of the minimum legal compliance. And so we just did that on Friday, May 19th. We at KSBA sent an email to at least one point of contact in every central office with a big packet. It looks like a track changes Word document showing all these suggested changes to policies. School boards will usually look at that over the summer, and in probably 2 monthly meetings, have 2 readings to all of the policy changes and then finalize that. So it's very important that you look not only at what those policy numbers look like now, but I believe at least 2 of those have some changes recommended in what we just sent out to boards. Boards and their board attorneys and payroll clerks and HR officials can look at that. You can take what we sent out as it is. You cannot make any changes to your policy. In other words, you don't have to do what we've marked up. You can make some other kind of change to your policy and adopt that. Each local board owns its policies. But I will say, and Ed mentioned this already, one of the things that we marked up in what we call our model version is that because of one sentence in the bill, whether they knew what they were doing or not, whether all of them intended for it to be this way or not, it was sort of thrown in at the last minute. It's all, in all likelihood, they didn't exactly intend this. Now they removed like half of a sentence in a statute. And what it left is one sentence that sort of says all encompassing, you shall not deduct any kind of membership dues for any kind of membership group, period. That probably will be addressed in the lawsuit that is pending. But unfortunately, the way government works, sometimes like we don't have authority to interpret statute, the courts do, and everything in the courts takes time. So until the court has a final opinion coming out in this lawsuit, because that one sentence is there, our model just takes out any mention in the policies of any kind of membership dues, but it also takes out a sentence at the end that says currently nothing else shall be deducted. Well, it takes that out. We believe that actually will allow school boards to adjust very quickly at any time over the weeks and months ahead when the courts finally rule on this one way or the other. But the main thing I wanted to say is find that email from KSBA, find the person, probably one person in central office that got it. It's often the superintendent, but not always. Be sure to carefully look at those policy numbers as your board decides what it wants to do. I wanted to share that big picture. Keep watching for Judge Shepard in the Franklin Circuit Court to rule on this, and stay tuned.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Can I add one thing, Dr. Caldwell?
Actually, Ed, I was going to turn and ask you if you would like to make a final wrap-up comment.
Yeah, the comment I wanted to make is that, be mindful too, that the governor vetoed this bill, and of course the legislature overturned it. However, the enforcement would fall under the Department of Labor, which falls under the governor. So that also is an additional layer, if you will, of security, that there's going to be no enforcement of these provisions until at least the decision is rendered. When it's rendered, we will certainly give you any additional information at that time. But if there's anything forthcoming in the immediate future as we monitor this, we will certainly get this to Dr. Caldwell. She can get it out to you in real time.
Thank you again, Ed. We are so grateful for you and your support and guidance of KASA. So Wayne, turning to you now, a final wrap-up comment for the group.
Yeah, I would just say, again, your board attorneys need to be in the loop, however you normally have them in there. But I will be happy if you want to email me or text me or whatever. There is a court order that says nothing is going to happen to anybody if you collect these dues and remit them. It says that, and your board attorney will clearly understand that when he or she reads that court order. I'll be glad to send it to you. It's available online. All attorneys participate in this thing called CourtNet. They can pull it offline themselves. If they don't want to do that, I'll be glad to send it to them. But just reassure them that we can go ahead and do this and keep our employees happy and protected without anyone whacking us over this. So that would be my message.
Okay. And Eric, final comments or guidance?
I'll just say really quickly, I just put something in the chat there. I know it's frustrating that now most of the major bills that pass in Frankfurt end up in court. And once something is in court, there's no clear timeline or deadline. You don't know when to expect anything. Something could happen next week or drag out for months. So we will keep, as Wayne and Ed have both said, we will keep watching that as well. Reach out to us when your board starts discussing all these policy changes. There's like hundreds and hundreds of changes this year on every issue. Always reach out to us with questions as well. They are correct that the one thing that is clear is that the state labor cabinet are the ones that had the power to enforce this with fines. And they have now said in court that they will not issue fines until everything gets wrapped up. Definitely that's true. And for everything else, just reach back out to us. My email is in the chat.
Thank you again to our three counsel for giving us guidance and direction today. We are right at the 12 o'clock mark. I did monitor the chat. I noticed that the questions were being responded to by all three of our experts here today. If we didn't get your question, if you please would follow up with me, or at email for me is rhonda@kasa.org. And I'd like for us to, for the KASA team to part with this message. And that is simply, it is such a stressful time for all of our educators right now. And let us be part of the de-stressing team for you and help you with this in any way that we can, so that you can do the same thing for all of the leaders, all of the teachers and classified support staff that you serve. And so thank you so much for your attention. This will be, the link to this by the end of the day will be on the kasa.org website homepage for easy access for anyone who wants to take it in again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.